We're Ascetic. We're here in sunny Lichtenberg, East Berlin. My name's August Skipper. I sing and play bass.
I'm Saxon. I play guitar.
I'm Andrew and I play the drums.
So our second album, Everything Is Becoming, came out at the end of 2015. We just released the second clip, Atheism. You know, it's been like a couple of years since our last album was released. Self-Initiation. You know, we wrote and produced and released it in Australia. And this album is something that I keep saying. It's like it's born from a journey with the violence of immigration, resettling to a new city, resettling to Berlin in particular, kind of the heart of Europe at the moment. I think it sort of contains a lot of struggle in it. It contains a lot of tension, but at the same time a lot of release. It's born of change and it's born of transit. You know, I've said before, but some of the songs were written in Australia, but they all sort of gone through this violent transformation of some kind or another. You know, I think there were several points along the way where we probably could have recorded another album, and each time it would have been quite a different sort of sound. But I think by the time we got to record this, it was I think it was like at a point of peace or something where it was kind of like coming to terms with post-punk roots without really trying to drag it too far away from that kind of sound. And it has the quality is that it's aware of what it is. I think the effort that we put into it was trying to just inject as much character as possible that was our character. Which, yeah, I've also said before as well, but trying to sort of reference ourselves, reference little voice memos or conversations we've had, or, you know, there's a piece of ambience recorded from the Vatican. You know, so just like these kind of shitty lo-fi moments that you kind of inject into something that which we recorded in a studio, which has quite a high fidelity to it, but you bring these kind of simple moments of yourself to it to give it a particular character. So this notion of change, of becoming, the title was it was just like a phrase that sort of came into my mind at some point in the past couple of years. Like it was kind of my epiphany, and I kind of found out later that it was what's his name? Pre-Socratic. You remember his name? Heraclitus? Yeah, Heraclitus, I think. So, you know, you can't step into the same river twice. But just the notion that everything's changing around you, whether you want to acknowledge it or not, doesn't matter if something looks permanent. I mean, all stones are turning to dust, or bones are turning to dust, etc. So, the album has this kind of, there's like a loose theoretical, I mean, there's a loose thematic kind of structure to it where the songs ascend in a kind of order. It's as if, you know, one's being sort of dragged through the muck of themselves before they're given this beautiful moment at the end. And it's this kind of notion of self-realization or awareness. So I think it starts with this kind of distorted, disturbed, paranoid, Phil K. Dickian kind of these elements of being chased by unconscious forces or something, and then I think by the end of the album there's like an acknowledgement of self-awareness or awareness of self. I was put onto Exegesis, this Phil K. Dick book. It's like a strange religious awakening that occurred at the end of his life, where he kind of came to the conclusion that all of his writings were actually, they weren't just fiction, they weren't just novels, but they were a kind of insight into the true nature of reality. So all of the protagonists and all of the kind of dark and light forces at work, we're all present our own reality and our own universe. But I got put onto the book by a friend who, he put me onto the book at first, and I thought, yeah, I'll check it out, whatever. And then I remember him calling me, several months later in a bit of a manic state, where he was telling me the more that he read the book, the more he felt that he was, plugged into the same universe of like this the pink hive he used to continually mention. And then he was sort of telling me stories about being chased as a 20-something. It's kind of like the higher he got in his own realization that it's like the more aware one becomes, it's like the more aware the negativity becomes, or the more aware the dark side becomes. And it's almost like this dark side bleeding into one's own reality. And that was certainly an influence on the lyric for that song and the mood of the piece. So that was the first single. Second single is Atheism, which we've just released. And I think it's sort of, to me, it's kind of like a bridge between the two albums that has this kind of dark, sinister introduction that suddenly sort of blooms into light or something. And it's about, about sort of self-awareness, about self-realization, about realizing that the gods you are beholden to are of your own creation, and to let go of them, all it takes is to acknowledge that and to let go. And I think it's one of the more uplifting tracks on the album, and that's why it's sort of perched toward the end before History, which I think is more of a pause, a re-entry into one's life narrative, etc. Well, I think, to me, we kind of weren't really consciously. It's not like we had a decision to move to Berlin when we arrived in Europe. We saved up enough money to get over here. We were touring with Airs, and OSCL Records was kind of funding a lot of the tour. And it was Saxon and my first time in Europe, and I think to see Europe in that, in like a flash, a different city every night, a different country nearly every second day or whatever. It's kind of, the word that I continually use is, it's like an awakening to scale. When you come from Australia, that's like this giant fucking continent with like 5 cities in it that are just like peppered around the edges of the place. It's like, you come to Europe, and you have in this small proximity, you have like 100 cities, all of this size, and all the things you become aware of, like the history of culture and how many layers of culture there are under each place. And it's like the underground here has had such a longer time to develop, has had so much more population to develop, has so much more history to sort of push behind it. And so we were 2 weeks in, and I think we kind of asked each other, it's like, should we just stay here? And it was kind of like, yeah, all right. Yeah, but it was kind of like, I don't know, no direction home or something like that. Australia has a great, Melbourne, where we're from, has a great underground culture and a great music scene. But it's just kind of like, again, the population is really the major drawback, because there's just like not enough people to get a vibe going. It's really hard. Nothing ever seems to stabilize. Like nothing ever seems to solidify. It's like anything of any interest kind of comes and goes, and then it's sort of taken over by the next thing, because there's not a platform for things to develop in a long term. So I think there's a real culture of people want to just kind of make it onto this mediocre radio kind of aesthetic, and because it's the only way to sort of get by as a musician there, which is kind of understandable in a way, but it waters down the potency of the scene. Well, I always think the birthday party is like a funny reference. Just because it's kind of like, I don't know. I don't think we've ever compared ourselves to them or thought of ourselves in them. Obviously it's a similar realm of stuff, but it kind of didn't really factor into our decision to stay here, like any of this kind of mythology. It was more just like the kind of the practicality of Berlin, that it's situated in the center of Europe. You can reach any city in an hour. It's like, I kind of think we didn't really know what we were getting ourselves into. It was just like, if we were going to stay here in this continent, it was like there aren't that many options. It's like London seems like unlivable, Paris seems unlivable, too expensive. Berlin has the kick of it's livable, and you can speak English to get by for a while. Yeah, and I think the 80s sort of dark wave scene, it's a completely different thing. I mean, the sort of prevalence of techno and electronic music here now is, ultimately, it is the ultimate here. There's not that much of a band scene, really. I don't think it's the kind of city where you come to kind of make it or even rest here. It's kind of, yeah, it is a city of change, I think. And I guess that's to do with the fact that it is the kind of place where East meets West, where North meets South, etc. But I mean, people are coming and going so quickly. I think a couple of years in this city seems to change people irrevocably, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, generally. Okay, so our next show in Berlin will be on the 22nd of April at Ava Club with Instruments of Discipline Presents. We're playing with Drab Majesty, Shania, and some great DJs, Zoya Zenyas, Luna Violenta, Alexander Schatten, and Georgette Franco, pre-op trance. Come.
searching for a